Before we begin, I respectfully acknowledge that I'm recording this episode on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations, whose presence and stewardship continues here today. Today's guest is someone many of you will already know through her writing, research, and advocacy work in literacy. Dr. Molly Ness is a former classroom teacher, reading clinician, researcher, and teacher educator. She earned her doctorate in reading education and spent 16 years as an associate professor. She's also the author of 6 books. She serves on the board of the World Literacy Foundation and has provided literacy leadership to nationally recognized literacy nonprofits and major educational publishers. She is also the founder of Dorigo Literacy, a consulting firm dedicated to research-based reading instruction. Dr. Molly, welcome to Behind the Educator's Lens. I am so grateful that you're here.
Thanks for having me.
You have worn so many hats in education, and you really are everywhere globally trying to help us with reading. When you reflect on your journey, what moments or experiences have shaped the way you think about reading instruction today?
Well, I will start with my doctoral training. I was very fortunate to spend 4 years as a full-time student, fully funded at the University of Virginia, which is actually the home to the nation's first and longest running reading clinic. And this was the early 2000s. The National Reading Report, panel report had just come out. At the time, we were calling it scientifically based reading research, which we are now calling, of course, the science of reading. And I was fortunate to study with top-notch researchers who really very much wanted teachers and doctoral students to be critical consumers and producers of research. So I really got a very strong foundation in the science of reading, and it has forever shaped my thoughts, my advocacy work, my work in schools. Then left Virginia to take a academic position at university in New York City, and New York was very much balanced literacy, so I sort of felt like I was like stepping back in time. But I was really interested in translating what I knew about research, and which was not widely accessible to teachers and school leaders and literacy coaches, and take that research and make it practical. And so that was really work that I continue to do now. We know that there's sometimes a 15 to 20 year gap between what research shows and how it makes its way into classroom practices. And to me, that's unacceptable. And this is not, of course, the fault of teachers or school leaders. This is a sort of outdated system of accessibility around research and translating it to practical knowledge. So I've always been really committed to getting research into the hands of people who know it, who need it.
That is a very helpful way to look at it, because sometimes we have the research separate from the classroom practice, and it's really like the merging of those two worlds that we need, where we can see the research in action in the classrooms. So how has your experience working in reading clinics influenced your belief on research-based instruction?
Yeah, so I will say that of all of my professional experiences, the summer that I got to lead the University of Virginia Reading Clinic was probably the most rewarding, because I was responsible essentially for 2 groups of students. 2 groups, of course, our K through 8th grade readers who were coming for evaluations and remediation, as well as overseeing the graduate students who are working in their capacities. So it was sort of this intersection of everything I love about reading, and it gave me this framework of looking at data and almost being a detective, meaning we would look at kids who were struggling with comprehension and then dig into why. What were the data showing that comprehension was the behavior that we were outwardly projecting? Was it issues in fluency? If that's the case, then we have to backtrack to word knowledge. And so I sort of felt like this detective really trying to figure out how to improve kids' literacy, and just found that really rewarding. And we also had a really robust body of knowledge at the time showing us what we need to know, which is that the vast majority of our kids are able to read by the end of 1st grade, and that with explicit, intentional really direct instruction, we can close the gap early on for the kids who are not yet reading at the end of first grade. So to me, it was this super exciting kind of moment. I think in literacy conversations, there's a little bit of doom and gloom, but the good news is we know what effective reading instruction entails. And for the kids who don't leave first grade reading where they should, we know what effective intervention looks like.
If you can start from the beginning, like you said, you can close that gap, because I would imagine as they get older, that gap gets harder and harder to close.
It does. There's something that I read in grad school called the Matthew effect, which was this theory posited by Keith Stanovich. And he was alluding to this biblical allegory that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, meaning that kids who get a solid foundation in early literacy skills, their literacy skills skyrocket because they are able to read, which then leads to reading volume. The more you read, the better your vocabulary, the better your background knowledge, the better you feel about yourself reading. So those kids, they skyrocket. But the kids who don't have that solid foundation, they kind of, the gap keeps getting wider and wider because it's this domino effect of a negative cascade of things. Kids who struggle to read don't want to read. We avoid what's challenging for us. If you're not reading, you're not getting fluency and vocabulary and all the things. And so your skills continue to decline. And that gap between the rich getting rich and the poor getting poor has always been something that is in the back of my mind. It always reminds me of the kids that I started my career as a sixth grade teacher. And I think is just one of those things that we need to be really mindful of, that that gap never narrows. And in fact, it actually exponentially grows as kids increase in age.
That's a really important thing for if you're organizing your school and you're deciding where some resources need to go. If we're trying to close the gap, sometimes we might actually need to make that tough choice and go with the younger friends so we can close that gap first.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on that there are so many tough choices in education. We have to figure out what our priorities are. And a lot of the work that I've been doing now is figuring out how to prioritize instructional time around literacy instruction, meaning one of the things that every teacher says, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough time. But if you look at observational data, we have more instructional time than we think we do. We have to prioritize literacy. We have to minimize off-task time. And so when I hear this, like, there's not enough time, then I encourage people to really dig deep into how they're using their time, how prudent they are in time-making decisions, and how we're going to allocate the real thing that we can control in our classroom, which is how we spend our time.
I actually think that is a best-selling course. And I'm not kidding, because I really do think that that is the biggest issue that I do hear, like you say, is it is time. And it is an entire framework that has to go into supporting that protected literacy time. And I actually think that in some of our big schools, it might need to be like, this is a protected literacy time for our school.
Yep. And we also know, like, I hate saying this because it comes across as teacher bashing, and I'm, of course, a huge advocate of teachers. But when you look at the majority of classroom time, there's a lot of wasted instructional time. And we have to be mindful of that and keep what Anita Archer calls a perky pace. And really, when I was actually modeling in middle school classrooms last week, and people kind of, A, I'm a New Yorker, so I move quickly, but B, the teachers, when they were watching me, couldn't believe like my pacing was quick and the amount of student engagement, because it was this constant, kids were engaged. They were either reading or writing or speaking about what they were reading, and every kid was actively engaged, so that the amount of stuff we did in a 40-minute block, people were like, it would have taken me 2 blocks to get through that. And a lot of that is just the pacing. We got to step it up a little bit.
I love that idea of perky pacing.
Yeah.
It sounds exciting even to be a part of. So like whatever it is that you're doing, if it's not long and dragging on. I remember my very first class where in university, I had to order an espresso. First time I tried it. So I'm so curious, your work is often also centered around the idea of making words stick. One of the books that you wrote last year was an excellent book, if you have not read it, filled with great strategies for how to teach reading in your classroom. But Ensuring language and comprehension is also equally important for our students. So, how do you define effective literacy instruction in today's classrooms? I know you mentioned you're in classrooms. What would that look like?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I'm hitting on both word identification and language comprehension. That to me is effective, multifaceted reading instruction. And the last 5 years have been a wild ride in my career in terms of conversations about the science of reading. And as much as I have been grateful for the amount of attention that's been focused on literacy, too much has been focused on just the word identification, the lifting words off the page. And we're overlooking the importance of language comprehension, which is the ability to make sense of language that's either written or spoken. And I really worry that 5 years down the road, we're going to look at data and say, well, we quote unquote did the science of reading and the data didn't move. Well, we actually are not quote unquote doing the science of reading unless we're really being mindful around vocabulary and reconsidering how comprehension is a process and an outcome, not something that we teach. So I want to make sure that my kids are really getting explicit foundational skills that don't just end at second grade, but really continue through morphology and word study and lead into fluency, but then also really are using writing as a means to extend comprehension. Like, I think we got to rethink how we're envisioning comprehension as this thing that we quote unquote teach. So to me, it's, if people are familiar with Scarborough's rope, it's hitting on all of those components, but it's not hitting on them in individual strands or silos. So I see a lot of kind of this notion that today we're going to focus on syntax, and in the next 15 minutes, we're going to focus on vocabulary without this mindful integration of how all of the things come together. Because Scarborough's rope is not a ladder. It's not a, here's how you teach. It's a infographic meant to show us how many things have to come together and be intertwined to produce comprehension reading outcomes.
And that image of the Scarborough's rope, it's interesting because the first part of that infographic, it does have them separate, and then you see them immediately weave together. So it's that understanding that we need to have prior to even the lesson is all the components.
Yep. Yeah.
So that will.
I am super mindful that you can take a really great picture book and teach every capacity of reading instruction with that really great picture book. I can get to all of the different strands with one text, as long as you're really doing it in a mindful, integrated capacity. So it's not this like, we need this program for word study and that program for fluency and this program for writing. It needs to be focused on text and that intentionality around that text. And that's actually like kind of my favorite thing to do is show, I'm going to go in, I got one book. I'm going to get to my decoding. I'm going to get to my encoding. I'm going to get fluency practice and vocabulary and writing and all of those different things. And when you think about that, then you're centering text, which is how literacy instruction should be. And you're doing it with perhaps the best resource out there, which is the richness of the body of children's literature. Talk about engagement, talk about motivation. Kids don't just want to read decodable text. They want to be bathed and entrenched in really great literature, which is the body of children's literature that's out there.
And I would like to say, like you just mentioned, picture books, and a lot of our world can be doom and gloom. That's one thing that's gotten better since I was younger, and since you were younger, I'm sure, is the evolution of picture books. Do you have a favorite picture book that you tend to pull off the shelf?
I mean, there's so many. I love picture books that tell stories of overlooked characters who've overcome adversity to make major contributions. So I love picture books about Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman in the House of Representatives, who really was just a face of civil rights. There's a picture book called Mighty Jackie. It is a historical fiction picture book about a young girl who was the first, she actually was a pitcher in the Major League Baseball. She struck out Babe Ruth. I love that book. Another one that I love is Love in the Library, which is a relatively recent book that tells about Japanese internment camps during World War II. And what I love about that is you can take these really dense ideas, like what happened to populations in World War II, and have accessibility around a big historical topic, and in a way that's engaging to kids. Like, I can build your background knowledge if you're a middle schooler talking about World War II with a really gorgeous picture books. It changes every day because there's so many out there. I'm also really mindful that research shows that there's this great research by my colleague Kristen Conradi, who did surveys of the texts that teachers read aloud. And not surprisingly, the books that teachers read aloud tend to be about 25 years old. They tend to be very narrow in their lens of representation, kind of white, able-bodied. They tend to be the beloved classics. And in no way am I poo-pooing Where the Wild Things Are and
Yeah.
Eloise and all of those great picture books, but we're missing the reality and diversity of our kids' lives and cultures and neighborhoods and identities if we're just reading from the classics. And we're missing the opportunity to have conversations about how life is in today's reality if we're just using those older picture books. And the cool thing is there are people on social media who their jam is knowing kids literature. So I'm not asking teachers for like, okay, now you need to be an expert in all of the children's literature that's constantly coming out. There are people who that is their sweet spot. Follow them on social media, reach out to me for lists of award-winning books, because this is, I think people's minds will be blown when they see like, wow, there are now picture books about everything under the sun, and are just so engaging and offer such amazing vocabulary words and writing extensions and all those sorts of things.
And also brings us back to that point that you mentioned earlier about saving time. The advantage of a picture book, it is short and they've already figured out how to take that time out for you. So you're not doing a whole novel study. You can
Yeah.
do it in a lesson. So
Yeah.
I love that. I love anchoring a lesson with a picture book. That is a great actionable takeaway that educators can use right away. Can you improve a lesson by bringing in a text and trying to see how you can incorporate all the elements of Scarborough's rope into that picture book and just build from there?
They're there. I mean, if you look at there also are researchers who have literally quantified and qualified the vocabulary offerings that are in children's literature. So they literally go through and look at the lexicon of words that are in children's literature. And I'm not just talking children's picture books, I'm also talking kind of like the early chapter books and middle grade stuff. Not surprisingly, picture books offer more richness in sophistication in vocabulary words than kids hear in everyday conversations and television and media. So without those picture books, how are kids going to hear the rich vocabulary words that they need to have access to make meaning of text as text gets more complicated?
Yeah, and also bring in your English language learners. That's a great way for them to be able to connect words with a visual representation so they can build their understanding of what these words connect to in their English language too.
Absolutely.
So you have served in leadership roles all around the world, World Literacy Foundation, International Literacy Association, the Reading League. I'm curious, from a systems level lens, what gives you hope about the direction of literacy education, and where do you think we still need to push?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I am hopeful about this moment in time because so many people are coming to the table and saying literacy matters not just to an individual child, but to our entire culture, our entire society. And if you look at the data, it is really compelling. We know that kids who are struggling readers grow into struggling readers as adults. All of the gloom and doom things are there in terms of school dropout rates, incarceration, mental health struggles, reliance on public assistance. So we all pay the price, regardless if you are a teacher or a parent and have kids in the school system. We literally all pay the price for illiteracy. what I am so optimistic and hopeful about is that message is now widely heard. And lots of people are coming to the table to have these conversations. Congress in the United States, my colleagues all over the country, all over the world are having these conversations. I just went to Sundance Film Festival out in Utah, and there was a whole day that was just about literacy. So documentary films, podcasts, all of these legislative bodies, the United Nations, pediatricians, all of these people are now saying, we got to get this right. And what to me is so cool about that is when so many voices come to the table, that's when real change is possible. What I am a little worried about is the implementation of the science of reading is really hard. In other words, we've spent the last few years doing the easy work. I don't mean any of this work is easy, but it is easier to explain Scarborough's rope and to show people the simple view of reading and to remind people why literacy is so important. That's the easy work. The hard work is changing systems and changing beliefs and implementing all of these things. And I worry that, particularly in America, where I'm tuning in from today, we want quick fixes. We lose stamina. We don't see this as a marathon, and we will kind of say 2 years down the road, like, we tried something new, let's move on to the next thing. So I do worry about the stamina and the implementation that is in many ways a big overhaul of lots of different things.
Yeah, I think that something that really is standing out here is that it can be so difficult to weave this theory and practice all together, and then to also feel educators like inspired so that they know that it is going to be a marathon, not something quick, or as often happens, pendulum swings.
Sure.
So we're not here and now we're here. And I'm so curious, if you were in control of a classroom yourself, how would you kind of take this by the reins and head back into your classroom with a plan tomorrow? What would you do?
So I think back to what I did way back in my first year of teaching was 1999. I know there are people out there who are like, I wasn't even born in 1999. I did all of the things that I now know are not research-based, meaning I taught spelling and word identification through rote memorization. Here are your spelling words, write them 3 times. Here's your vocabulary, look it up in a dictionary, copy down the definition. And I love poking holes at my own instruction because it's this welcome invitation to others to say, like, I thought I was doing the right thing. I was well-intentioned. I just didn't know. And if I have the courage to do that, then we can invite lots of other people to do that self-reflection. So now I would go back and really center text as the shining star. So I would do more background knowledge activation than I used to do. We know how important that is for comprehension. I would have fewer things that I did with more routine and more intensity, meaning I would do things like, all right, we're going to examine text structure, and we're going to look at one text structure with 3 different graphic organizers. And all of these graphic organizers are the same thing, but I'm going to give you lots of variety. And really what I think is far more effective, and actually what the research shows, is fewer things done better and not pushing kids into cognitive overload. So I would do more of, we're going to center the picture book. We're going to use that for fluency practice. I did not do enough fluency practice. My middle schoolers needed to be doing choral reading, echo reading, all of those things. I should have done that. I should have chosen vocabulary that came from the text, and I should have had my writing instruction be an extension of the comprehension of the text, because what I did, pretty classic, kids would come in, their due now was a sentence on the board that was full of grammatical mistakes, and, copy it down and fix the mistakes. Does nothing to actually make kids more ready to use syntax and semantics, so I would have scrapped that. I talked a little bit through my vocabulary and my spelling. I would have done more things by linguistic pattern. So instead, what I did was I would choose spelling words based on here are the errors that my kids are making, rather than say, we're going to study a deep dive of whatever linguistic feature. So, when I was teaching my first year, I basically had nothing. I was in a very under-resourced school in East Oakland, California, high poverty area. So I was kind of pulling things every day and making it through. There was no long-term intentionality. So I would really redesign a lot of that.
So like having a scope and sequence that you're following along.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think about a lot, and I'm supporting schools in now, is in the States, there's this delicate dance of teacher autonomy versus programs. And I think a lot of us have this negative vision of what a program is. We think it's this robotic, like I just sit and I read from the script. And what I think we overlook is that teachers are not trained to be curriculum designers. And if you really want to have intentional, long-term, systematic alignment in horizontal as well as vertical, like there are organizations and companies that is what they do. They have teams of people to do this work. And so I actually kind of wish people would adopt programs a little bit more. I think there's a lot of them that are great, that balance teacher autonomy versus robotic, that also offer really great authentic text. I'm in no way an advocate for programs that don't have rich read alouds and center text. But I think we got to say, like, we are all spinning our wheels and recreating stuff time and time again. Whereas if we adopted a really great evidence-based program, we could focus on quality of instructional delivery rather than recreating things and piecemealing stuff together.
That is very true, and it feels very reminiscent of my teacher candidacy, where, we were asked to juggle learning how to be an instructor and how to write lesson plans that I had no idea what was going to happen. But I love that you mentioned that you don't just have to take a program and just read it robotically. I was in a classroom yesterday that was using a program, and she had taken the time to think about, how do I insert that perky pace and how do I make this really engaging for the kids? And I know how to read, and I wanted to be a part of her lesson. I wanted her to pull my lucky duck so that I could, do the writing or to come up and do the activity. And so these programs are there, and I do agree that that is a good component there, is then to figure out, okay, what do I do with this, and how do I bring this to life in my classroom? Are there any programs that you recommend for us to look at?
So it's hard to not shine the light on UFly for word identification K through 2. Out of the University of Florida, created by Holly Lane. I've spent a lot of time recently with Holly, traveling and speaking together at conferences and such. Holly had a study come out about a year ago, which measured the effectiveness of UFly. And typically when you measure effectiveness of programs, it's a scale of 0 to 1. And
Okay.
0.4 is kind of the hinge point. 0.4, I always say to my doctoral students, is like, you're getting your bang for your buck. The statisticians came back from doing this study, which was thousands of kids over an extended period of time. The effect size was, I can't remember if it was 1.2 or 1.4. It was through the roof in an amazing way. And I remember I saw Holly after the study came out, and I gave her a big hug and congratulated her because she's created this program that the teacher manuals are like $60. Like, this is like easy to implement, ready to go, and super effective. And I said, what was your reaction when you got the effect sizes back? And she said, I made the statisticians go run it 3 times because I didn't believe. Nobody has effect sizes that are that high. So it's hard for me not to just shout from the rooftops about UFly, and it's really getting a whole lot of traction in the States. I was actually just speaking at a conference in Ireland, and it's doing really well there. I am really excited about some of the newer programs, and they're not newer, I would say they're lesser known programs. that look at language comprehension. There's one called, which is a K-8 one, centering authentic text. So they're all the great read alouds that you already want to do, but they are designed with a scope and sequence and linked to writing and linked to vocabulary. And another one that I'm really fond of is Bookworms. Bookworms is also an open access one. And by that, I mean the creator, who is a colleague that I did doctoral work with, Sharon Walpole, very much believes that every child should have access to high quality instructional materials, regardless of their zip code, regardless of the school budget. And so she created Bookworms, which is all around authentic text. So kids are reading Frog and Toad, and kids are reading all the classics, but you can go and literally like download it for free because she is that invested in equity. So I love that platform. This is not something that you need. You got to buy the books, of course, or have them in your school library. But other than that, you can literally download it and like use it tomorrow. So I love everything I do is grounded in equity. And I love that this is something that your school can literally start tomorrow with $0 in the bank. So Bookworms, also the research around Bookworms, through the roof as well. So I am really putting my value or my energy into high quality instructional materials that have a evidence base. And by that, I mean, we have to be cautious. This is a time when big companies and educational publishers are seeing dollar signs in the science of reading. And so their marketing is like, they'll take whatever program they've had and put a shiny new sticker on it that says aligned with the science of reading, and they haven't done anything then to change the program from how it was 10 years ago, but they're just sort of seeing dollar signs. So we gotta kick the tires and check under the hood and be critical consumers and go with the programs that have research around them. Now that is different. So I think about evidence, research tested and research based. So let me clarify those two terms.
Yes,
research
please.
tested is we took this program, we used it in classrooms with real kids, real teachers, and looked at what the measures were. That's the gold standard. Research based is we know there is a body of evidence showing fluency is important. So we're going to put some fluency in our program, but our program actually hasn't been tested. So I am wanting the programs that have the research tested, which is they've been analyzed and they've been published in peer-reviewed journals. And there are some out there that we, I hope, get the spotlight. Now, you may not have heard of Bookworms if you're a listener.
No.
So people are always cautious, like, oh, I haven't heard of it. Maybe, that's, and free, we always think of like free is lower quality. The reason you haven't heard of it is because remember, the creator of it is all about equity. And she realizes if she were to sell it to a big company, then they do the glossy advertising and they have the swag that they give away at the exhibit halls of conferences, and that all comes with a price tag. So they don't have the recognition because they don't have a sales team that's pushing it and the marketing and the ads on Facebook and all the things. But that's actually a good thing because it means you can go and download it for free just because you don't have, travel coffee mug that says the name of the program because they haven't, like, there's an intentionality around it. So whenever I'm working with schools that are considering adopting it, they always bristle. Well, I've never heard of it. I'm like, that's actually a good thing because they haven't sold it so that there's all of the bells and whistles around it.
You are absolutely correct on the idea that some companies are going and trying to make things look like the science of reading. There was one product that came in and it was meant to be a intervention resource for kids where there were multiple sounds on one page and the scope and sequence was filled with rote memorization. When teachers are looking through materials, are there some telltale signs that it is a resource we should run from rather than adopt?
Yeah. So I will say that there are organizations that have done that work for you. So the Reading League, which is, I'm not sure if it is in Canada yet. It is a 10-year-old organization that was created by well-intentioned teachers and professors who had done all the coursework and all the certifications and been teachers forever and basically said, I didn't get enough training in the science of reading. And so if I didn't get it, there's thousands of me's out there. So the Reading League was created. There are now state chapters all around the country, and there's a national organization. They have a conference in fall that's amazing. It's 3,000 people. This year it's in Chicago. It's like mind-blowing learning. But their best resource, they have something called Compass. And if you go to the webpage and pull down a menu that says like for curriculum adopters, they have reviewed many, many different materials. And they analyze, does this have, rote memorization? Does it include 3Qing? Does it include tier 2 like all of the things? And they evaluate them, a panel of unbiased folks. They then publish their evaluation of it, and then the publisher of the program can then also have a response. So you can literally go and look at these evaluations, and they will have a green light or a red light or what have you. So my first stop is always the Reading League. And I tend to not, when I'm working with schools who are doing the work of adopting materials, I tend to only go with recommendations that are on the Reading League page, because organizations, publishers, recognize the value in getting on these lists. And there actually are some publishers who have refused to submit materials. That to me is a red flag. Like, what are you hiding? If you're not clamoring to get evaluated, you're off my list in my mind, because I know there's a backlog of people who are like, please review our materials. We want your seal of approval, because at least in the States, if you're not on that list, then you don't get on state adopted lists. So it's kind of this, in many ways, a gatekeeper in a good way. So the Reading League, I would encourage everybody to look at all of their resources, but that one, their curriculum adoption materials, is just fantastic.
Dr. Molly, really, you have dropped some really important and actionable steps right away. We've got our picture books, we've got bookworms, we have our Reading League. So we are improving our instruction by the second. I love it. And these are all actionable things that, are not overwhelming. They actually take away work, which is beautiful.
And are free. That's
the other. Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's kind of a shift, right? Where free used to be like, oh, what's for free? I remember my dad used to love a free hot dog. And so he would go and we'd go to the brick, but you'd have to go inside to get the ketchup and the mustard. You'd have to go into the kitchen section. So that's kind of the free I grew up with. But now these are actually the researchers that are like, hey, I actually want you to take my stuff because I care so much about kids. And I think sometimes we look at that and we think, okay, what is the end game here? And actually the end game is that we all have a literate society. And so that is huge, and that is well worth the platform. So thank you for sharing those beautiful resources with us. I'm going to add them onto my page right away and make sure that I have them. And I'm excited to try them out. So if you could leave educators listening today with one grounding Dr. Molly Ness thought, something to think about as they head back into their classrooms, what would it be?
There's 9 million, but the one that I pull out my soapbox and stand and shout from the rooftops is read aloud to every single child, every single day, every single classroom. A lot of my work looks at the power in language comprehension around read alouds. There is a crazy, insane body of research showing that listening to a read aloud improves all of the academic things. It improves kids' socio-emotional capacity. It actually improves you physiologically and psychologically. I know it's wild research I will be happy to share later on. But we know that for many kids in many schools, we see the read aloud as like an earned thing, or it's one of those, oh, we ran out of time, we're just not going to read aloud, or your behavior today was not great, there goes the read aloud. It's not a time filler. It's not a luxury. It is an essential. It is a get to do, want to do, should do, have to do, must do for every kid. And we actually know that read alouds, not surprisingly, decline as kids increase in grade level. And I want to make sure that every kid, K through 12, has a read aloud in some capacity. And that looks really different in different classrooms. It may not look like I'm in the teacher rocking chair reading a picture book cover to cover. In a 7th grade social studies text, maybe today is whatever, October 15th, I'm going to read aloud from this book, which is all about a day in history. And here's what happened October 15th, 1783. In a gym class, I've actually worked with PE teachers who are constantly changing sports and games and use that as an opportunity to read aloud. So, for example, I was working with this gym teacher. He was like, every like 4 weeks we change sports. And usually I just tell the kids the rules of volleyball or badminton or whatever. So he went to the Sports Association, US Volleyball Association, and literally did read alouds of the rules and like broke it down for like, awesome. That's amazing.
Yes.
So there's so many, if you're a social studies teacher and you're studying a particular historical person in history, read their obituary, read aloud their speeches. Like there's so many innovative ways, and just all of the research is there showing how essential it is for so many different components.
I love that you showed us there how reading changes depending on what context you're even in. So you can have your PE teacher not questioning reading because what makes sense for you, and it's reading your volleyball manual. So, or your social studies and you're reading the day in the life of the history. Reading really does fit in everywhere. And so when we can show kids that, then we're off to a good start. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that great idea with us too. That would be a really great challenge for a school to see if you could incorporate reading in every single subject area.
Yeah, and my fifth book, which is called Read Aloud for All Learners, has tons of those ideas about cross-content read alouds, and it has a compilation of books and award-winning lists and all the different ideas and ways to really play on read alouds, because again, the science is there. Like, you don't age out of read alouds. There's a reason that audiobooks are as popular as they are now for adults. And we actually see that your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, decreases when you listen to a read aloud, and your pleasure hormones, your oxytocin, increases. Wild science, totally wild science, just by listening to somebody read aloud.
Do you think, does it still work with an audiobook? Is it the same?
It does. The science is showing that your brain activation can't decipher if it is an audiobook or an actual human reading aloud. Like, the same language activation systems happen in the brain. And so that's another hill I will die on, that audiobooks are not cheating. They are actually doing the same stuff, and they are an access point for lots of kids. And for us, my book group, my, Tuesday night drink wine and eat cheese adult book group, if I have a tough book that I can't get into, I start with the audiobook as I'm driving errands, kids to sports and stuff. That's my entry point in. And then I can pick it up and read it with more success. And so it's the same for kids.
That's brilliant. And I would also like to just point out, like you said, it lowers cortisol levels. So then it could also be an embedded social emotional activity. Absolutely. Is that you're actually reading to the kids and having them notice what happens from the beginning of the story to the end of the story in terms of their own feelings. And now you have your social emotional lesson, and kids are learning that reading or listening to reading can actually help them when they're feeling upset outside of the classroom or in the classroom too.
This great study that looked at kids who had really challenging behaviors, and they just created a protocol where they read aloud narrative texts. And narrative text, what does it do? Builds empathy. You're putting yourself into somebody else's shoes and thinking about like how it might be in that perspective. And what the research team found is those kids, better self-regulation, less conflict, more conflict resolution, like all of the things that we also want to see just from read alouds.
So like another reason to not skip that read aloud is, yeah, it actually could help you rein in that behavior that you're trying to punish them away from taking that book away. What an interesting insight. Thank you so much for that. That's always great when we're thinking, maybe I won't do this. And then you think, but maybe this will actually help me and help them. Then maybe I will.
Yep, absolutely.
Dr. Molly, thank you for your wisdom, your advocacy, and your deep commitment to reading, because it does truly matter for kids and educators and for our whole community. To our listeners, you can learn more about Dr. Molly Ness, her research, writing, and professional work at mollyness.com. including access to papers on language comprehension, vocabulary instruction, and literacy policy. If this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a colleague or leaving a review. It helps these conversations reach more educators, which then helps us reach more kids. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and one another. This has been Behind the Educator's Lens.